Retired veteran Jack Carter walked into the crowded supermarket to grab a few things for dinner. But then he saw her, a little girl standing by the cereal aisle, her hand raised, not to reach for something, but as if she was signaling for help. No one noticed, no one, except Rex, Jack's old canine partner. The German shepherd froze, eyes locked on the tattooed man holding the girl's hand. Then he barked, loud, sharp, unrelenting. Jack pulled on the leash, but Rex refused to back down. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. What was the girl trying to say? And why did the dog recognize the signal instantly? Stay with us? Because what the little girl signaled and what the dog discovered next would uncover a truth so shocking the entire store fell silent. Before we begin, make sure to like and subscribe. And really, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country's name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. The late afternoon light filtered softly through the wide glass windows of Harbor View Market, a small-town grocery store perched near the quiet lakeshore of Clearwater, Oregon. It was the kind of day that felt peaceful enough to fade into routine, the smell of brewed coffee drifting from the corner cafe, the rustle of shopping bags, the steady rhythm of carts rolling over polished floors. Jack Carter, a 42-year-old veteran with calm eyes and a quiet demeanor, guided his cart down the aisle, one hand resting loosely on the handle while the other held the leash of his companion, Rex, a retired canine shepherd. The olive-green jacket Jack wore still carried a hint of the discipline and structure of his former life, and even in this civilian calm, he moved like a man trained to read the world in glances. Rex, 6 years old and built with the strength of memory and muscle, trotted close beside him. The German shepherd's sable coat gleamed under the lights, a black saddle marking his back, his chest and legs a warm tan, and his eyes, amber and alive, constantly scanning the space. To strangers, Rex looked like a well-trained service dog. To Jack, he was more than that, a comrade, the one presence that had stayed with him when the world after war had grown too quiet. The dog's behavior was steady, precise, every motion deliberate, every breath controlled. Yet, even in this calm, the old instincts never really rested. They moved past shelves lined with cereal boxes and canned soup, the hum of small talk filling the aisles. Jack reached for a jar of coffee, humming to himself, his mind half elsewhere, perhaps thinking about dinner, or how different life felt without the chaos of command. He didn't see the shift right away, but Rex did. It began as a small change, a pause in his stride, a tilt of his head, a slight tension in his shoulders, his ears pricked forward, tail dropping just slightly, body lowering into a stance Jack hadn't seen in years. The veteran stopped mid-motion, the jar of coffee still in his hand. "What is it, boy?" he murmured quietly, setting the jar back down. The dog didn't answer, only stared down the length of the cereal aisle, nostrils flaring as if catching something invisible. Jack followed the gaze, expecting a spilled carton or a noise, but Rex's stare wasn't random. It was fixed, sharp, almost surgical. Jack felt that small spark of recognition, the same gut feeling that used to crawl up his spine during patrols overseas. He straightened, eyes narrowing slightly as he scanned the aisle from left to right, and then he saw them. At the far end stood a man and a little girl. The man was tall, rough around the edges, his forearms covered in dark tattoos, his posture stiff as though trying to imitate calm. In his right hand, he gripped the small wrist of a girl who couldn't have been older than 5. She had soft blonde hair that curled lightly at the ends, pale skin, and a bright, red sweater that made her small frame almost glow against the gray light. Something about her stillness was deeply out of place. Jack watched for a few seconds. The man pretended to read a cereal box, shifting his weight uneasily. His eyes darted from side to side, scanning not the products, but the people around them. The girl didn't move. She clutched a worn stuffed rabbit close to her chest, the faded fabric pressed tight against her small fingers. Her shoulders were tense, her gaze fixed on the floor until, almost imperceptibly, she lifted her chin. Her eyes met Jack's for a single heartbeat, and in that second, he saw it. Fear. Controlled, buried, but unmistakable. Then her small hand began to rise. It wasn't the thoughtless motion of a child reaching for a toy, nor the casual wave of greeting. It was deliberate, trembling, her palm open, fingers together, held close to her shoulder, the kind of signal Jack had seen only in safety training seminars for children. A silent cry for help. She held it there, frozen, like she was praying someone would understand. Most people in the aisle kept walking. Nobody looked, but Rex did. The shepherd's reaction was immediate. A low rumble built in his throat, and before Jack could speak, Rex let out a sharp, commanding bark that tore through the soft chatter of the market. Shoppers turned. A few startled gasps echoed as Rex pulled against the leash, muscles taut. Jack's reflexes kicked in. He tightened his grip and whispered, "Easy, Rex." But the dog wouldn't yield. His body was coiled, his gaze locked on the man. The veteran followed his partner's stare and saw it now, the way the man's hand tightened around the girl's wrist, the subtle wince she tried to hide. The man looked up, forcing an awkward smile. "Sorry about that," he said, his voice too casual to be convincing. "She's just scared of dogs." The explanation hung in the air like a weak disguise. Jack gave a polite nod, masking his suspicion, but the unease deepened. Rex barked again, sharper this time. The sound made the little girl flinch, and the man's grip tightened further. Jack stepped forward, his tone steady but firm. "Sir, you're holding her a bit tight there." The man's face twitched, his forced grin faltering. "She's fine," he muttered, pulling the child closer. The girl's eyes flicked back to Jack, that same desperate look, now pleading. The tension in the air thickened, unseen but palpable. Rex's tail lowered completely, his breathing slow and steady, like a soldier locking onto a target. Jack felt it too. His instincts whispered that this wasn't ordinary fear. Something darker lingered behind the quiet. At that moment, a familiar voice called out from near the entrance, "Jack Carter?" Turning slightly, he saw Maria Franklin, the store's head of security, a woman in her mid-30s, broad-shouldered, her dark hair tied neatly back. Her uniform bore the calm authority of experience. Years ago, she'd served under Jack's command in logistics. The recognition flashed between them, not nostalgia, but understanding. Maria caught sight of Rex's posture and the tension in Jack's stance. Without another word, she approached slowly, hand brushing the radio on her belt. Jack met her halfway with a quiet gesture, one hand open, signaling her to stay calm but alert. Maria's eyes followed his line of sight, landing on the man and the girl. Her expression hardened, subtle but certain. She moved toward the nearest camera console, pretending to adjust a display while switching on the recording feed. Jack stood still, body slightly turned, trying to appear casual. He bent to pat Rex's back, but his voice was low and deliberate. "Something's off. Watch him." Maria's voice came through his earpiece moments later. "Got eyes on them. They don't look like family. You sure you want me to—" "Wait," Jack interrupted softly. "Not yet." The girl's hand had dropped by now, clutching her toy tightly again. Her small chest rose and fell quickly, eyes darting between Rex and Jack, hope flickering like a candle about to die out. The man whispered something to her, but his expression betrayed impatience more than care. Jack took a half-step closer, lowering his tone. "Sir, you okay there? You look a little tense." The man turned sharply, eyes narrowing. "We're fine," he snapped, too quick to sound convincing. His body shifted slightly, angling the girl away from view. Rex growled again, quiet but deep, his paws sliding forward by inches. Jack tightened the leash but didn't pull back this time. He was reading the man's body language, the restless stance, the tight shoulders, the shallow breath of someone who wanted to leave but couldn't yet risk it. Every part of Jack's training told him this was no misunderstanding. Maria reappeared from the end of the aisle, pretending to check shelf labels, her tone casual but her eyes sharp. "Jack," she said lightly, "you need help with that bag of dog food again?" It was a signal, a reminder. Stay calm, act natural, keep the suspect still until confirmation. Jack gave a faint smile. "Maybe," he replied, never breaking eye contact with the man. The silence between them stretched thin. The child shifted slightly, her fingers trembling around the stuffed rabbit. Rex's gaze flicked to her and back, as if he understood. The hum of the fluorescent lights inside Harborview Market had softened into a kind of uneasy quiet. Jack Carter stood still between the shelves, one hand resting lightly on the leash of his German shepherd. Rex's body was rigid, his head tilted, nostrils flaring as if catching something invisible in the air. To anyone else, it was just the faint smell of detergent and fruit wax. But to Rex, it was something else entirely. Something older, sharper. A scent he'd known on the edges of collapsed buildings, in tents filled with frightened children, in the heat and dust of foreign rescue zones. It was the unmistakable trace of fear. Jack could feel the dog's tension before he saw it. Rex's paws shifted ever so slightly, his breathing deepened, the muscles along his back tightening in silent readiness. Jack's instincts, sharpened from years in uniform, understood immediately. The dog wasn't reacting to a noise or to movement. He was responding to human panic, the kind buried beneath silence. Jack's gaze slid toward the man holding the little girl's wrist. The man looked calm on the surface, but something in his posture betrayed him. His shoulders were drawn high, his eyes scanning the aisles, restless and searching. "Everything all right there?" Jack's voice was light, conversational, the tone of a man making harmless small talk. The man's head jerked slightly, then he forced a smile. "Fine," he said, his voice just a little too quick. His hand tightened on the girl's wrist, too tight. The child's face flinched, her eyes lowering to the tiled floor, the quiet wince lasting barely a heartbeat. She tried to hide it, to stay small, but Rex saw everything. The dog's pupils narrowed, a quiet, vibrating growl built in his chest, not loud enough to alarm anyone yet, but deep enough to ripple through the leash. Jack felt the sound through his hand. It wasn't aggression, it was awareness. Rex had found something he couldn't unsense. Jack stayed calm, breathing through the tension, his voice a low murmur meant to diffuse the air. "He's just protective," he said with a faint smile. "Old habits die hard." But behind that calmness, Jack's mind worked fast. He gave a small nod toward the end of the aisle where Maria was positioned, near the security desk. It was barely perceptible, an old soldier's signal, but Maria caught it instantly. She turned toward the monitors, fingers flying across the control pad to pull recent footage. The man shifted again. His tattoos flexed across his forearms as he adjusted his grip on the little girl. "Pretty dog," he said. His tone was light, but his eyes never smiled. The girl's other hand twitched, hovering near her chest, clutching a small toy bunny so tightly its ear bent. She wasn't crying, she wasn't speaking, but her silence had weight. She looked up, just for a second, toward Rex. And that was when she did it again. Slowly, trembling, she raised her guillaume, free hand. Not high, not waving, just an open palm, fingers together, shaking slightly in the cold light, the help signal. Jack's heart clenched. For a moment the world seemed to shrink to the few feet between them. The man's voice broke the spell. "You okay, sweetheart?" he said, his tone too rehearsed, too sweet, too late. The child froze, the hand falling halfway before she could complete the motion. Rex's growl deepened, turning low and deliberate, his tail stiff, head lowered. Jack's voice was still soft but carried steel beneath it. "Sir, you're holding her pretty tight. Let her breathe." The man's jaw worked. "Mind your business," he said quietly, but there was something in his voice that cracked around the edges. Sweat gathered along his hairline. Jack tilted his head slightly, catching Maria's whisper in his earpiece. "They didn't come in together," she said. "Two entrances, separate times. He followed her after the checkout lanes. This isn't family." Her words dropped like a weight into the silence. Jack didn't respond. He didn't need to. His body language changed, subtle but unmistakable. The relaxed shoulders straightened, the polite half-smile disappeared. The soldier inside him surfaced again, calm and deliberate. Rex sensed the change instantly. The dog's focus sharpened, every muscle coiled and ready. His ears pointed forward, his chest expanded with a slow, measured breath. He emitted another sound, not quite a bark, not quite a growl, but something ancient and final. A warning. The man noticed. His eyes flicked from Rex to Jack, to the exit, to the gathering crowd beyond the aisle. For a brief moment his composure cracked, and what emerged was raw panic. Jack saw the telltale signs, the tightening jaw, the shifting feet, the desperate twitch of someone calculating escape. Jack took one slow step forward, voice calm but commanding. "You don't want to do this." The man blinked fast, sweat sliding down his temple. His hand twitched again, fingers digging into the child's wrist. The little girl's eyes filled with tears she couldn't let fall. Her lips parted, but no sound came out, only a small, quick breath that trembled like the edge of a sob. The man's body leaned slightly forward. Jack's hand dropped closer to his belt. Rex's stance lowered further. The whole world seemed to hold its breath. Maria's voice came again, barely audible through the static of the radio. "Backup is 3 minutes out." Jack didn't move his eyes from the suspect. "Understood," he whispered. The man must have caught the whisper because his eyes widened with sudden comprehension. His mask slipped completely. The faint charm vanished. In its place was something cold and cornered. He tugged the girl toward him, too roughly this time, and she stumbled against his leg, letting out a soft cry that silenced the entire aisle. And then Rex growled. No longer restrained. No longer testing. It was deep, guttural, a sound that seemed to come from the earth itself. Jack had heard that growl once before, during a humanitarian mission years ago, moments before Rex had dragged a terrified child from the ruins. It was the sound that meant one thing. The line had been crossed. The man flinched at the vibration in the air, his breath quickening. His grip turned desperate now, panicked. He looked left, right, searching for a way out. Jack could see the decision forming before it happened, could almost feel it, like the pressure of a storm, seconds before it breaks. The man's jaw clenched, his hand jerked, and suddenly he yanked the child's wrist hard, spinning toward the nearest aisle. The moment the man bolted, Harborview Market erupted into chaos. The sound of crashing boxes and falling bottles shattered the uneasy calm that had hung between the shelves. Emily's small frame stumbled behind him, her cries barely audible beneath the noise of clattering carts and startled gasps. Jack's voice rang out, sharp, trained, commanding. But the suspect didn't slow down. The man barreled through the cereal aisle, knocking over displays and scattering fruit across the polished floor, his heavy boots sliding as he dragged the terrified girl along. People screamed, ducking behind shopping carts. The smooth rhythm of a normal afternoon was replaced by the pulse of fear and confusion. Rex shot forward like a streak of muscle and discipline, the leash slipping from Jack's hand in a single swift motion. The shepherd didn't wait for a command. Instinct had already taken over. His paws hit the floor with precision, weaving through overturned products and narrow corners with the confidence of an animal trained to think faster than humans could react. His amber eyes locked on the target ahead. The man's moving silhouette, the faint trace of adrenaline and sweat, the sound of hurried breathing mixed with the sharp broken gasps of a frightened child. Rex's focus was absolute. He wasn't hunting, he was rescuing. Jack darted after them, his boots echoing through the tiled aisles, the rhythmic slap of his footsteps carrying urgency and control. His field training pulsed through every movement, his voice steady even in the chaos. "Maria! Block the south exit," he shouted, already calculating angles in his mind. Shoppers stood frozen, unsure whether to move or film. "Everyone step back!" Maria's voice cut through the confusion with authority. She grabbed the emergency shutter control near the freezer section, lowering half the gate before the suspect could reach that side. The suspect veered left into the snack aisle, his shoulder colliding with a stack of paper towel packages that toppled like dominoes. Emily's small hand clawed at his sleeve, her voice trembling with a sob. "Please stop," she whispered, but the man's grip only tightened. He was sweating heavily now, breathing hard, panic driving him more than reason. His tattoos glistened under the fluorescent light, veins pulsing against his skin as his plan began to unravel. Every turn he made, every path he tried to take, seemed to close behind him. The supermarket was becoming a maze, one he didn't know was already working against him. Rex took a shortcut, cutting between the end caps of 2 aisles stacked with cleaning supplies. He moved with silent precision, tail low, head forward, his paws barely making sound against the linoleum. A spill of detergent slicked the floor, but he adjusted instantly, claws gripping with perfect balance. The dog emerged at the far end of the aisle just as the man appeared from the opposite direction, forcing him to stop. Abruptly, the suspect froze, startled by the sudden presence of the animal that now blocked his path. Rex's ears pinned forward, his stance wide and steady. His growl rumbled like distant thunder, low and restrained, the sound of warning rather than threat. Jack appeared seconds later, breath controlled but eyes sharp. He was 30 feet away, his pulse steady from years of experience in high-risk rescues. "Let her go," he called, his voice calm but unyielding. "This doesn't end the way you think it does." The man's breathing quickened, eyes darting toward the fire exit sign glowing red at the end of the corridor. "Stay back," he barked, panic cracking through the last of his composure. Emily whimpered, clutching her stuffed bunny in one hand while trying not to fall. Jack lifted one hand slightly, palm open in a show of restraint. "No one's getting hurt. Just stop." Rex took a slow step forward, his growl deepening but measured. He could read the man's trembling hands, the quick shift of his weight from one foot to the other. The shepherd wasn't guessing, he was anticipating. He could smell the intent, the shift from fear to flight. Behind them, Maria appeared from the side corridor, holding her radio in one hand, her expression locked in professional calm. "The rear exits are secured," she said quietly. Jack nodded once, keeping his eyes on the suspect. "He's boxed in." A voice rose from behind the rows of frightened shoppers. It was deep and calm, the kind of voice that belonged to someone who had seen danger before. "Clear the aisles," it commanded. An older man, perhaps in his late 60s, stepped forward with steady composure. His gray hair was cropped short, his movements deliberate. His name tag read Arthur Winslow. His posture carried quiet authority, an aura that lingered from another lifetime. He had been a police officer once, before retirement turned him into just another face in a grocery crowd. But old instincts never fully retire. Arthur moved with purpose, positioning himself between the bystanders and the unfolding chaos. "Keep back," he told them firmly, gesturing with one hand. "No cameras. Give them space." The crowd obeyed. The suspect's panic grew desperate. His breathing turned ragged, eyes wide as he looked for any escape route left. "Don't come near me," he yelled, dragging Emily toward the emergency exit. The child stumbled, crying softly, her knees scraping the floor tiles. Jack's patience broke. He took a step forward, voice hardening into command. "Enough! Let her go now!" His hand moved to his belt, pulling free the tactical handcuffs clipped to his holster. "You take another step, and you'll regret it." The man hesitated, his chest heaving. "You think that mutt scares me?" he spat. But even as he said it, Rex's growl grew deeper, rolling through the space with an authority that wasn't human. The shepherd's amber eyes stayed, locked on the man's wrist, following every twitch. Jack's voice dropped lower, almost a whisper now. "Rex," he said, "hold." The single word was both command and permission. The air between them vibrated with tension. The man tried his final gamble. He shoved a shopping cart aside and lunged toward the side door. The movement was clumsy, fueled by panic. But Rex was already in motion. The shepherd's body surged forward in one clean burst of controlled power, muscles rippling beneath his sable coat. His paws hit the ground in perfect rhythm, his body a blur of precision. He didn't leap to bite. He intercepted. His weight collided with the man's legs, cutting across his path, forcing him off balance. The man crashed hard onto the polished floor, the sound echoing through the aisles. The child fell back safely out of reach, landing beside a stack of soft grocery bags. Jack closed in fast, dropping to one knee beside the fallen suspect. "Stay down!" he commanded, snapping one cuff around the man's wrist with practiced efficiency. The suspect struggled once, then went still, the realization of defeat settling over him like heavy air. Rex stood firm at Jack's side, breathing hard but controlled, his tail stiff, his eyes still trained on the man until Jack gave the signal to relax. The noise of the chase faded into a stunned quiet. Arthur approached, his hand resting lightly on the girl's shoulder to reassure her, his voice soft. "It's over now, sweetheart. You're safe." Around them, the shelves stood crooked, products scattered like debris from a storm. But amid the chaos, there was calm, a strange, fragile kind of calm that followed after the moment everything could have gone wrong. Jack exhaled slowly, his pulse steadying as the adrenaline began to fade. He looked down at Rex, who stood tall, chest rising with steady breaths, his fur brushed with dust but his eyes alive with purpose. Jack's voice was quiet, but it carried gratitude. "Good work, partner." The shepherd's tail moved once, a single thump of acknowledgement, before he sat down beside the rescued child, his gaze gentle now but unwavering, still guarding, still ready, still the soldier he had always been. The chaos had finally broken into silence. Shattered packaging and half-spilled groceries lay scattered across the gleaming floor of Harborview Market, but in the middle of that wreckage stood a scene so still that time itself seemed to hesitate. Emily clung to Jack's chest, her small fingers gripping the fabric of his olive-green jacket as though it were the only safe thing left in the world. Her sobs came unevenly, short and trembling, the kind of crying that comes from exhaustion rather than volume. Jack held her gently, not with the rigid control of a soldier, but with the quiet steadiness of someone who had carried fear before and knew how fragile relief could be. Rex stood beside them, the 6-year-old German shepherd whose sable coat was now marked by streaks of dust from the chase. His head remained high, but his eyes stayed fixed on the girl, protective yet calm, his body forming a silent barrier between her and the subdued man lying in cuffs a few yards away. The fluorescent light caught the edge of his amber eyes, making them gleam like two steady lanterns. Each time Emily shivered, Rex would lean just enough for his muzzle to brush the back of her hand, an instinctive gesture of reassurance learned long before today, in places far less forgiving than a supermarket. The man on the ground, still panting from the struggle, muttered incoherently as 2 police officers arrived, their radios crackling. They were led by Sergeant Hal Bennett, a broad-shouldered man in his early 50s whose lined face carried the weary calm of long experience. He knelt beside the suspect, his latex gloves snapping as he began the search. The first pocket yielded nothing but loose change, but from the second came a small folded paper, creased and stained. Bennett unfolded it, eyes narrowing. A hand-drawn map. It wasn't of the supermarket, but of several city blocks around Clearwater's public library. Red circles marked bus stops, parks, and the path toward the lakefront. He reached into another pocket and pulled out a short length of nylon rope, a broken keychain, and a handful of tiny trinkets, a rubber ball, a miniature plastic doll, and a small notebook. Inside were sketches of children's faces, scribbled names and addresses. The air seemed to tighten around them. Jack watched silently as the evidence built itself piece by piece. There was no room for assumption now. This wasn't a moment of confusion or misunderstanding. It was a deliberate plan that had been interrupted mid-act. Emily pressed her face deeper into his jacket. "He said my mom was waiting," she whispered, her voice thin and shaking. "Outside the library. He said she told him to take me home." The words broke apart between sobs, each one softer than the last. Jack didn't answer right away. He only held her tighter, the warmth of her small frame grounding him in a world that had so easily gone cold. Maria stepped closer, her expression drawn tight with disbelief. "I've seen him," she said quietly, her brow furrowed in thought. "Last week, by the playground near Birch Park. He just sat on the bench for hours, watching the kids. I remember thinking it was odd, but..." Her voice trailed off, the unfinished sentence heavy with regret. Jack glanced toward her but said nothing. There was no blame to give. Hindsight always arrived when it was too late to change anything. Sergeant Bennett exhaled, his voice low but steady. "This isn't the first time we've had reports about a man matching his description, always near schools, libraries, or playgrounds. Never caught him in the act, until now." He looked up at Jack. "You and your dog did more than stop a kidnapping. You stopped a pattern." Jack nodded once, the compliment meaning less than the fact that the girl in his arms was alive. Rex shifted position slightly, sensing Emily's heartbeat slowing against Jack's chest. The shepherd's breath came out in short, soft huffs, his posture both alert and tender. When Emily finally dared to lift her head, she met Rex's gaze. For a moment, something wordless passed between them. Trust, gratitude, recognition. She reached out with a hesitant hand, resting her small fingers against the fur of his neck. Rex didn't move, only blinked slowly as if acknowledging the fragile courage of that gesture. The child's sobbing faded into quiet sniffles. Reporters hadn't arrived yet, but word was already spreading through the aisles. The hum of whispered conversations filled the air like ripples on water. Shoppers who had seen the chaos unfold now watched from a respectful distance, some with hands clasped over their mouths, others holding their children a little closer. Someone whispered, "That dog saved her." Another added, "He stood right in front of her like a soldier." Their voices carried awe, not fear. The sight of Rex sitting tall beside the trembling girl had struck something deep, proof that courage could look quiet, that heroism didn't always wear a uniform. Jack finally stood, his muscles aching from both exertion and the weight of adrenaline leaving his system. He handed Emily gently to a paramedic who had arrived, ensuring her comfort before turning back to Sergeant Bennett. His voice remained calm as he walked through the sequence of events: Rex's reaction, the child's signal, the chase, the final tackle. Every detail mattered, but he emphasized one thing above all. "It was Rex who saw it first," he said. "He recognized something before any of us did. He's the reason that girl's alive." Bennett gave a small nod of respect toward the dog. "Instincts like that don't lie," he murmured. Maria crossed her arms, glancing around the aisles that only minutes earlier had been a blur of movement. "I don't think people will forget this," she said softly. And she was right. Someone near the registers had already captured a single photograph: Rex, standing tall in front of Emily, the girl's small hand resting on his shoulder while police lights flickered faintly through the glass doors. That image would soon spread through the town before the evening was over, but for now it remained private, shared in silence among those who had witnessed what compassion and vigilance could still mean. Arthur Winslow, the retired officer who had helped manage the crowd, approached slowly. His face carried the calm of someone who had seen both the best and worst in people. He looked at Jack, then at Rex, and nodded with quiet approval. "Most folks forget," he said in a low, gravelly voice, "that heroes don't always announce themselves. Sometimes they just act." Jack met his eyes and returned the nod, appreciating the simplicity of that truth. Arthur patted Rex gently on the head before stepping back into the dispersing crowd. The flashing lights of police cars painted the glass walls of Harborview Market in alternating hues of red and blue. The suspect was led out in handcuffs, his eyes downcast, the earlier defiance drained into hollow silence. Behind him, shoppers parted like water, their expressions a mix of anger and relief. Near the entrance, Emily sat wrapped in a silver blanket, Rex lying beside her, head resting on his paws. Every so often, he would lift his eyes toward her as if checking that she was still safe. Jack stood a few steps away, speaking quietly with Bennett, his voice low but carrying the weight of conviction. The night outside had begun to fall, its reflection glimmering against the polished floors. Within the soft hum of cleanup and murmured conversation, Rex remained steady and still, the living image of vigilance. Around him, gratitude filled the air, gentle, unspoken, and enduring. The night air outside Harborview Market carried the faint hum of police radios and the rhythmic wail of a departing siren. Inside, the fluorescent lights had dimmed, leaving the aisles bathed in a gentler glow. Jack Carter stood quietly near the entrance, his hand resting on Rex's collar as the last officers cleared the scene. The supermarket no longer felt chaotic. It was heavy instead, filled with the quiet stillness that follows the end of something terrible. Then, the sound broke through the silence, a cry, raw and unmistakable, from the doorway. A woman ran inside, her coat half slipping off her shoulders, tears blurring her eyes as she called her child's name. Emily turned before anyone else could react. The moment she saw her mother, the trembling in her small frame gave way to motion. She ran forward on unsteady legs, her sobs bursting like the release of a dam. Her mother fell to her knees halfway across the floor, arms open wide, the reunion colliding in a moment that silenced every remaining sound around them. She held her daughter so tightly, it seemed she feared the world might steal her away again. "I'm here, baby," she whispered over and over, her voice broken and soaked in relief. The crowd that had stayed behind turned their eyes away, out of respect for something too intimate to intrude upon. But even in her mother's arms, Emily's small hand searched behind her, reaching out until it found Rex's fur. The shepherd had followed quietly, stopping just a few feet away, his body lowering instinctively as if understanding his place in the moment. Emily didn't let go. Her tiny fingers curled around the thick fur at his neck, and only then did her sobs begin to soften. It was as though the warmth of the animal anchored her back to safety. Her mother looked up through her tears, finally seeing the dog and the man beside him. For a long second, she couldn't find the words. You saved her," she said faintly. Jack shook his head, his voice low and steady. "Rex did." Outside, The police were leading the handcuffed man toward a waiting patrol car, his head down, the flash of red and blue lights painting his face in fragments. The storm was over, but its echo lingered in everyone who had been there to witness it. Jack knelt beside Emily once more, his voice quiet enough to be heard only by her. "You did great," he said softly. "You remembered the signal, didn't you?" The little girl sniffled, her eyes glassy and wide. Jack smiled gently and nodded toward Rex. "And he understood right away. That's how you know you were brave enough for both of you." She pressed her lips together, trying to hold back another wave of emotion, and managed to nod. Rex wagged his tail once, a slow, thoughtful gesture more like acknowledgement than excitement. He sat close, his head tilted slightly as if listening to a conversation that didn't need words. Jack gave his collar a gentle tug, but the dog didn't move. Emily reached out with both hands, clutching his muzzle, whispering something too soft for anyone else to hear. When she pulled away, her face was streaked with tears but no longer shaking. She looked up at Jack, her voice fragile yet hopeful. "Can I see him again? Maybe another day?" The simplicity of it caught him off guard. Jack felt something shift inside him, a small, unexpected warmth that made his throat tighten. "I think he'd like that," he said quietly. The officers finished loading the suspect into the car, and the sound of the door closing seemed to mark the end of it all. Maria approached with a tired smile, her security badge catching the light. "I'll handle the reports," she told Jack. "You should take him home. He's earned it." Jack nodded, grateful. As they turned to leave, he caught one last look at Emily, still wrapped in her mother's arms but with one hand extended toward Rex, her fingers curling in a small wave. Rex paused just long enough to tilt his head and wag his tail again, a slow and gentle farewell. The parking lot was nearly empty now, wet from an earlier drizzle. The reflections of flashing lights shimmered faintly on the asphalt. Jack walked beside Rex toward the truck, each of them moving slower than usual, the weight of adrenaline giving way to quiet exhaustion. He opened the passenger door, letting Rex climb in before taking his seat. For a moment, neither of them moved. Jack rested his arm across the back of the seat, staring out through the windshield at the faint fog creeping in from Clearwater Lake. His voice came low, almost a whisper. "You did it again, partner," he said. "You saved someone." Rex turned his head slightly, his breath fogging the window, and then rested his chin on Jack's arm with a quiet sigh. The drive home was long and still. Streetlights passed in slow intervals, cutting across Jack's face like the ticking of time. Every once in a while, he glanced at the passenger seat, where Rex sat calmly, eyes half closed, the exhaustion of purpose showing only in the slow rhythm of his breathing. There was a kind of peace in that silence, the peace that comes not from victory, but from doing what had to be done. When they reached the house, Jack parked by the porch, the night quiet except for the faint sound of crickets. He reached over, scratched behind Rex's ear, and smiled. "Rest easy, old friend," he murmured. "You've earned it." A week passed before the next chapter of that night found its way to them. The sun over Clearwater burned gently that morning, the park filled with laughter and the rustle of early autumn leaves. Jack sat on a weathered bench near the lake, Rex lying by his feet, eyes half-lidded in the warmth. The shepherd's coat shimmered gold where the sunlight touched it. Then he heard the familiar voice, a small, eager sound calling his name. "Mr. Jack." It was Emily, running across the grass, her red sweater bright against the green. Her mother followed, smiling softly, her face still carrying the traces of gratitude that time could not erase. Emily stopped just short of Rex and crouched down. The dog lifted his head, tail thumping twice against the ground, before he stood to meet her. There was no fear in her this time, only joy. She wrapped her arms around his neck, and Rex leaned into the embrace with a quiet patience that spoke louder than any bark could. Her mother approached and knelt beside them, eyes glistening again, though now from something gentler than grief. "He remembers you," Jack said quietly. Emily looked up at him, smiling through the remnants of tears. "I remember him too." The lake shimmered in the sunlight, the breeze carrying the smell of pine and water. Around them, the ordinary hum of life carried on, families picnicking, children playing, the world continuing as if nothing extraordinary had ever happened. But for the three of them, Jack, Emily, and the faithful dog sitting proudly between them, The world had changed, even if only in the smallest of ways. It had become safer, kinder, just by the act of one old soldier, one brave little girl, and one loyal heart that never forgot how to protect. And as they sat there, with the lake glinting softly behind them, Rex laid his head on Emily's lap, his breathing steady and content. Jack leaned back on the bench, a faint smile in his eyes, the kind of peace that only comes when you know you've done right by the world. Sometimes, the quietest moments reveal the greatest strength. Not the kind that shouts or demands to be seen, but the kind that simply acts, because it's right. Loyalty, courage, and compassion are rarely loud. They live in those who stand watch when no one else is looking, who choose kindness even when the world forgets its meaning. Somewhere tonight, a child sleeps safely because someone cared enough to listen, to notice, to protect. Maybe that is how light truly spreads, not in grand gestures, but in the quiet decisions of ordinary hearts. If this story has touched something within you, share it with someone who still believes in goodness. Tell us what you felt, what you thought, down below. And if you wish, stay with us. Subscribe, listen, and walk beside these stories of hope. May God bless you, and may your days be filled with the kind of peace that follows kindness.